on board.
So take your left hand lower. Yep. Stairs right this way.
Yeah, thank you. Maginaw sa taas.
Spent a couple of years living on a boat on the heart of Seattle, and then got married and decided that was too small, so we moved down to Renton, just about 20 minutes south. So I kind of lived the whole stretch along here. But now you know a little bit about me, and I already know something about you. What I know about you all here is you are very, very smart. That's because you all chose the best tour in Seattle. That's right. Give yourselves a round of applause. Did it. Here on the waterfront, we've been here for a long, long time, and there's been a lot on the waterfront for a long time. As we go along, you'll see a lot of big signs for restaurants. We're known for our seafood in Seattle. To our right behind Pier 55, Pier 54, and they can see, and they loved it so much so that people would get on his taxi, ride it over, and then refuse to get back off because they just wanted to come back and listen to his stories again. Within 2 years, he realized he was in the wrong business.
Nakasakay kami ngayon sa barko. Gantay muli sa barko.
Seattle. The first two stops, though, their fans destroyed the hotels they stayed in. So when they were coming to Seattle, every hotel in the city said, no, go away. Edgewater was still in a lot of trouble money-wise, so they thought, well, we got three sides out over the water. We only got to protect one. How hard could it be? So they invited the Beatles to stay at the Edgewater. They put up a 12-foot fence in front of the bridge. That bridge is actually a double helix, like our DNA. It's an award-winning bridge built by the former occupants that allows pedestrians to cross over to get to the beautiful parking lot here. Now, that office building is home to the second deck, so I'm going to come join you on the second deck. We have made it to the industrial side of town. Off to our right-hand side, we do have Vickers Shipyards. It's going to be these big, great U-shaped vessels. These are dry docks. This is how we do maintenance on large vessels. Mostly, Vickers Shipyards have contracts with the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Washington State Ferry system. Right now, we have a Washington State Ferry in that first dry dock, and a couple of Navy vessels as well. The middle one there is the Cape St. George. That's a Ticonderoga class missile cruiser, and I can personally tell you that it has the cleanest fuel tanks in the fleet. That's because I did a short stint there cleaning fuel tanks on that boat. Right next to it is a littoral combat ship. It's going to be the very wide ship in the next dry dock. Near coast water. That's what littoral means. Let me get batteries real quick. A couple of great things here. The first thing, you're going to see these blue vessels here in the middle. These are a tug and a oil tanker. That's right, that little guy close in the United States, so you may never see him again. He's kind of used for mid-sized jobs. Essentially, anyone that's too big to get into a fuel dock like he's sitting at, but too small to need a full oil barge, full load for an oil barge. Right next to it is a very interesting barge. This is part of the Alaskan rail system, actually. This green barge here says Alaska Marine Lines on the front. You might notice there are train cars on it. That's because it also has train tracks. And the pier that it runs up to is also loaded with train tracks. They load those trains directly onto the barge. And they do this because it's simply not feasible to run train tracks all the way up to Alaska. It's just too far to run through wilderness. Maintenance does not really work. So because of that, you can see there's a whole lot of stuff there. There's a U-Haul up there. We've seen ambulances, portable housing, porta potties themselves. Out of here, go up that inside passage towed by tugboats. And boy, do we have a lot of tugboats to talk about. First up, these red tugboats are Crowley boats. That one there on the corner, Nanook, the big one, that is a tanker escort. They escort oil tankers up to Alaska and back. He's got giant water cannons on the top, just in case anything happens. And he's that big because he can single-handedly push around an oil tanker. Now, not quite as big as oil tankers, we have oil barges up next. It's going to be these black barges that say double full on the side. Real quick, I want to point out the one we're passing at the moment. You'll notice the name Dr. Bonnie W. Ramsey. That name is an actual doctor here in Seattle. She works at the Seattle Children's Hospital, and she's a research doctor working on cystic fibrosis. Her work alone has doubled the life expectancy of kids with cystic fibrosis. So in honor of that, we named a barge after her here in Sport. They have the lion head and a red stripe on a white tugboat. We're coming around the corner, and we'll see another one of their barges. You notice the name is All Aboard for Here. That was part of the same naming donation. They auctioned off a whole bunch of naming rights, and the buyer actually gave the naming rights to Seattle Children's Hospital, who picked out those names. Now, what's special about the All Aboard for Here is it is not a standard barge. It does have a point. Most barges are fairly flat-ended, and when we get around to the back of it, you may notice it looks a bit like a tanker. That's because the tugboat is attached. This is an articulated tug and barge. And the point of this is tankers get a lot better fuel efficiency out at sea. But tugboats and barges have a lot better maneuverability when they're in ports. So they kind of took both of those ideas and slammed them together. The tug sits in the back in a specially made notch. It has giant gears in the bow of the tugboat that match up on an overnight shift. And unfortunately, they put the deckhands room right behind those gears. So anytime they needed to shift those gears up and down, I got woken up. It was not pleasant, but they are very fuel efficient and great at what they do. But that does bring us into the eastern waterway here. This is where a lot of our shipping happens. You'll see a whole lot of shipping containers all over the place. The reason we have so many piled up is not a labor shortage. Most of these shipping containers are empty. The reason for that, we import a lot more than we export, and it is often cheaper for them to simply make a new container and ship it over full of goodies than it is for us to send them back empty. But of course, we do have a couple things we're looking at to get rid of them. You can take one of those containers home with you. They only cost a few $1,000s to buy empty. Or there are companies that will make an entire home out of that container and sell it to you. A while back, you could buy a container home on Amazon Prime shipping. That was an additional $4,000 to ship it to you. As we come along, you might be able to look up and see these cranes working on these ships. Those are gantry cranes. They load and unload the shipping containers off of these ships. It takes them only about 60 to 90 seconds per container loaded on and off. They're very, very skilled at what they do. There's only one person up in that crane dropping those boxes on the ships. And because of that, they're very well paid. So much so that it is incredibly competitive to get that job. There are not many of those crane operator jobs, and to get that job you have to be a longshoreman. There are several requirements, but a lot of people do qualify. So many, in fact, that the last time they hired more crane operators here in the Port of Seattle, they only had about 335 openings available, and they received 15,000 applications. They essentially just went ahead and did a lottery drawing to decide who got to fill those spots. That is actually intentional, but the design and the discovery of that bulge, they call it a bulbous bow, was not intentional. They had a Navy ship that was testing out some new sonar equipment, and sonar equipment is incredibly sensitive, so they had to find a place to put it on the boat to keep it safe. Essentially what they came up with was putting it way up on the bow in its own little containment. Aside from the research they got on the sonar equipment itself, they found that the boat was all of a sudden getting a lot better fuel efficiency. When they studied it further, they found out it was because of the bulge created by the sonar equipment. Essentially, it works by breaking the waves before the ship gets to them. And so a lot of ships have now been built with that bulbous bow. As we make our turn, we're going to start to see the clock tower. It's just off the bow of us now. It's a brick clock tower. It's got an American flag flying off the roof and some suspiciously familiar green. They are local to absolutely everyone on this boat. They are worldwide by now. It is pretty hard to find anywhere that does not have a Starbucks. In fact, it is the only chain in the Pike Place market. They are that giant I was talking about earlier. The only reason that Starbucks is allowed in the Pike Place market is because that is Starbucks' oldest location. Not their first. Their first location burned down. They moved 3 doors down. But at the time, they only had one location, and so they were allowed into the market. Once they started expanding, they were not kicked out of the market. However, we'll see if they ever leave, if they're allowed back in. So they're holding on to that one store there in the market. Now, if you go to visit them there, it's going to be a long, long wait to get a coffee at that oldest Starbucks. So what we suggest is go about a block in any direction. You will run into another Starbucks, get your coffee, and then go back and take your selfie in front of the old signage. A lot of people want to know where the name Starbucks comes from. All of the founders were fans of the novel Moby Dick. They loved that book, and originally they wanted to name their coffee after the whaling vessel in that book. That vessel was the Pequod. Now, a lot of their friends and family quickly came along and told them no one is waking up in the morning craving a hot, steaming cup of Pequod. So they instead went with the first mate on board, Starbuck. We are coming up on our next site to see our U.S. Coast Guard base here in the Waterway, right on the edge of Seattle. The first ship we're going to be able to see, big red hull, is the icebreaker Healy. Now, of course, what does an icebreaker do? Well, our Coast Guard icebreakers go accompany the Coast Guard to parties and introduce them to people. Now, of course, they go up and down into the Arctic zones, break ice. Mostly they do research and supply runs for the research stations. The Healy specifically goes, is doing some major maintenance in California, so it hasn't been able to do its run yet. Behind the Healy, you may notice there's another icebreaker. This is the Polar Sea. But the Polar Sea will never leave the dock again. She is simply a donor for parts for the Polar Star. Now, normally I'm talking about the Coast Guard cutters that we have here at our Coast Guard base. But they are no longer our Coast Guard cutters. We recently sold the two cutters that will come into view in just a moment to the Sri Lankan Navy. What's most interesting to me is if you look at this front vessel, you'll see the numbers P627. This vessel, when it was owned by the Coast Guard, was the 726. So it did not take much to get those numbering done on the bow of that vessel. As we come up, we was Seattle's midlife crisis purchase. See, what do you go do when you have your midlife crisis? You go buy an expensive convertible. That's exactly what we did. The roof of that stadium will go entirely on and off at the touch of a button. They did this because we got tired of having rainouts, but we still wanted to be able to play in the sun. An open air stadium would mean a lot of rainouts, but a closed air stadium meant no sun on those nice days. So instead, we have a removable roof. And of course, I did say it was expensive, and when it was built, it was the most expensive single-use stadium in the country. Of course, the Yankees found out and very, very quickly built a more expensive stadium. They could not let that stand. Now, speaking of expensive things, a lot of people here are looking for souvenirs. Everyone needs to get souvenirs when they're leaving Seattle. And that's just kind of what you do when you're traveling. Now, if you're tired of paying a lot, pay you $100,000 to take them. That's right, the Port of Seattle wants to send you home with one of these giant red gantry cranes. That's a great gift for friends and family. All you have to do is figure out how to get it out. The reason they want to get rid of these is they want to turn this terminal into Seattle's third cruise ship terminal. That's right, we want to fit even more cruise ships. We want to get that #1 record despite only running half the year. Now, I pointed out earlier the tall building on the right side of the skyline with the triangular top. This is the Smith Tower, and in fact, this was the first skyscraper in Seattle. It doesn't look like a lot by today's standards, but back then this was truly tall. And honoring that old style, up there on the top, just below the pyramid, is a speakeasy bar that you can go to with a great observation room. You can't actually go into the pyramid up on top unless you are good friends with our a massive condo. In fact, that glass orb up on the top, well, it used to be a water reservoir to create water pressure for the building. It has since been turned into a glass reading room with a direct view into the field. That apartment did not come cheap. It was listed at first at $17,000 a month. The residents were able to talk them down to $13,500 a month. But you do get a lot for that price. And that's because that top reading room looks right down into Lumen Field. So it comes with a season ticket to all of the games there. Alright, if you look to the left of Smith Tower, you're going to see a tall, black, square-ish building. This is the current tallest building in Seattle, the Columbia Center. This is another great place to go get a high-up view of the city. They do have an observation deck. But of course, I'm not just talking about it because of that observation deck. No, that would be too simple. The reason we talk about the Columbia Center is its interesting origins. That building is 997 feet tall, but it's also 67 floors. If you know anything about floor height, 67 floors should be much taller than 997 feet. Now the reason for this, when they first built it, it was supposed to be much taller. So much so that they had to go get permission from everyone. They got their permits from the city, they got their plans from the architect. They sold all 67 floors before they even broke ground. And then the FAA came calling. Turns out we have a lot of airports in the area, and 1,000 feet is where our flight paths run. The FAA told them, hey, we're not going to stop you from building that building, but if we have to reroute any plane every single time we do, we're going to send you a fine. This could not happen. They cut one of the decorative towers off the top of the building, but that wasn't quite enough. So they ended up having to cut 6 inches off of every single floor so as not to pull out of any of their deals already sold. Because of this, they call it the shortest, tallest building in the city, being the shortest 67-floor building that I know of, at least. But with that, we are coming back to Pier 55. We made it the whole circle, 8.5 miles around the bay. But with that, I need to jump off the microphone. I'm not just your narrator today, I'm also your deckhand. That's right, they make me do everything. So I'm going to go run down, tie up the boat. I'll be the last person to talk to as you get off the boat. So if you have any questions, need any recommendations, I do know quite a bit about the city and I'd love to help you out. So I'll jump off.
As you mentioned, he is one of my deckhands, so he's going to head down and prepare to tie the boat up. Do you have any final questions for Dan, or any recommendations of things to do, places to see? He really is an excellent resource for that, so feel free to chat with Dan on the way out. Like you mentioned, I'll be there on the gangway to say goodbye. Now's a great time to look around your seats and gather up all of your personal belongings. Don't want to leave anything behind on the boat today. Also, if any bar tabs open, get those closed out before disembarking the boat. And there on the second deck, you'll notice the forward stairs are closed. We kindly ask that you use the back stairwell to disembark today. We will be boarding our next group of passengers up the forward stairs, so it helps with traffic patterns. So if you look there on the second deck again, forward stairs there are now closed. But with that, folks, so we'll be docking here shortly. If you have any glassware, crew are going to walk around the boat and collect any last minute glassware. So be sure to hand that off to them if you see that. And we'll be back shortly.
Very good, pero naka-fast forward siya kayo slow mo. Hindi ka mo nagpicturean. Hindi ka mo nagpicturean. Next time naman na. Nagsublitay mo lang. Picturean ka tuyo lang. Madamdaman mo? Yeah. Ha? Oyster? When? When? Sabi niya ka? Oyster? Bisin ako? Oyster ka? Noon? Pinakot lang ako ito mo na ano? Delivery na. Ha? Delivery na.
grab all those personal belongings before disembarking the boat. And on behalf of myself, the crew, and Argosy Cruises, we thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again in the near future. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.